Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today is a landscape tutorial and I will be adding in some vibrant greens and some flowers to celebrate spring. I'll be using my favorite brushes today, and as always everything is in the description below. You can see these are quite frayed, so that just happens with how I paint, but I love it and it doesn't bother me. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm using Arches cold press watercolor paper here, and I am wetting the front part of my paper, and then I also wet the back part of my paper. This is going to help the paper stay flat, and I do add a lot of water to my landscapes. You can see why those bristles become quite frayed, because I am very rough on my brushes. With the same brush, I am just pulling directly from the blue paint there, and I am just spreading it randomly, and I'm visioning a little bit more of wispy clouds. So I am using the white space to act as my clouds, and then the blue peeking through as the sky, of course. Now this is a water scene as well, so I am taking the same blue and then I'm adding a little bit of a darker blue to it. Again, the colors will be in the description below, because at the moment I can't remember the colors that I used, but I take the two blues and I then add it to the lower left hand corner of the painting to show that it's water. And again, these are very subtle, it's a subtle sky and it's a subtle body of water. That's what I tend to do, and I think if you're a beginner, then this is quite simple. You can't go wrong, especially since it's just a little bit of paint and you're letting that wet on wet just have the paint spread. So I think it's a really great way to kind of introduce yourself to painting water and skies, which sometimes can be tricky. You can easily overwork this. I still tend to overwork my painting. Actually, you'll see it in this video, but I fix it. So it's fine. But yeah, so I think that's really quite easy. Especially if you're just starting out. And personally, I just like the style. And using blue today, I'm not really one to use blue, so going outside of my comfort zone. But I thought it was a perfect video for spring, even though we just had a few snowstorms in my area and summer is next month. It's just wild. I am taking some black now, I believe it's lamp black, and then I do end up accidentally continuing to dip my paintbrush into Payne's Gray, so it's a bit of those two colors. If I could go back, I would change the mountain. I probably would do Payne's Gray if I'm honest, but I do enjoy lamp black, but I think I would have changed the shade a bit more just to fit in with the blue tones. But let me know what you think. You might not even notice. I could just have a critical eye, as we all do with our own work. Now, if you want to know how I'm doing these mountains and why I'm doing them this way, and just a breakdown of what I'm doing, because it might seem a bit confusing, I'll go ahead and link the video to my mountain tutorial on how I achieve different types of mountains using a wet on wet and a bit of dry brushing. So I do add layers to this, and I will use a lot of water, and then I will stick my brush directly into the damp paint just to get more of the dry brush effect. When it comes to me painting mountains, I probably should be a bit more mindful of shadows, but I really enjoy playing around and just letting the brush do its thing. and give me different texture. I personally just like that and enjoy it, but it isn't, it is always nice to know where the shadows are and how the shadows work in your painting, especially if you're going to go for a realistic take on a landscape. But the more I look at this painting, maybe the top part of that mountain's in shadow because of the clouds. So I think it works out in the end. All right, I should note that the paper in the bottom right-hand corner is dry, so I am adding my wet paint directly to dry paper, and I am alternating between a dark green and a light green, and I drag the brush towards the water and I just end up making a little bit of land with different jaggedy shapes. So you'll see me do that here. And since the paint is wet, whatever paint I laid down, when I add a different shade and hue of the green, it blends together quite nicely. I decided in the end that I was going to take the land all the way to the other side of the page and having the trees be smaller to emphasize that they are further away, and then the trees on the right hand side are closer, so those are going to be much larger. And then I decided to keep up with the loose style here, so I'm not getting details in here at all. I'm just taking my brush and dragging it up and using the point of the brush to create those tall points for the trees. But it's very loose, it's very jaggedy, and that's what I decided to do, and I think it worked out. And you might be able to hear my cat eating because he decided it was the best time to eat his kibble. So I'm sorry about that. I do the same thing here as well, and I do get more details in the right hand side, but I think it works out quite nicely. And you can see that paint, the darker paint, is just going into the lighter paint really nicely. And then I decide to go in with another layer, but at this point the paper was starting to dry. Because I did wet on dry, the paper started to dry a bit faster than if I had wet it before. So you can see the paint pushing away and it's starting to look overworked. But I just continued to add my other paint on top, and then I did a magic trick, which I sprayed the paper with water, and then the water of course made those little droplets and it pulled the paint away, but it worked out in my favor because I wanted to give the illusion that there are bushes there and that maybe light is peeking through. So I sprayed it, as you can see here, and then now it's just nicely blended. But I end up adding some grass, and then I add flowers in the end. So really it worked out, so don't worry about it too much. Once you start to see that it's becoming overworked, then go ahead and I would at least put the paintbrush down because sometimes it's hard to do that and you want to keep working it and it's hard to come back. But if you do a little bit of a spray, I've found, at least in the foreground and with landscapes, that it works. Though it won't necessarily work with every painting, but in this case it is just fine. You can see though that when I did spray my paper, the trees became even fuzzier on the right hand side. But not to worry, I go ahead and add some darker values of green, and I give a bit more detail to the trees. So it does end up being okay. If you find that part of your painting is when it dries, it just seems a bit dull or a bit flat. I found that to be the case for these trees. You can always add a darker value of the color that you used or the same color and add some water and continue to work the paint over the areas that you already painted. So you can see when I did that, it already added a little bit of shadows and just a little something extra to the landscape. Because I'm putting so much emphasis on the right-hand side, I didn't want the left-hand side to completely fade away. But to be truthful or honest, I could have added more details and added reflections in the water, but I got lazy and decided not to do it. But for future videos, I definitely will incorporate that into my landscape paintings, just to show any of you out there who are new how I would personally do it. And you can see I'm adding more trees, and I also just drop in some darker green to give some contrast, and then that will just naturally feather out and blend in. I have several videos on how I do these trees, so I'll go ahead and link my landscape playlist below if you're curious on how I get these style of trees. I have lately been painting the bristles, not the bristles, what would it be? The branches facing down or pointing down versus reaching up to the sky. So I'll have to do a future video on how I do those type of trees. Now I took some yellow paint and mixed it in with some white, and I wanted to add flowers. But honestly, this is not dark enough. If you want to use gouache, I am absolutely for using gouache. I think it's a wonderful way to add more depth to your watercolor painting. So I'm definitely on board with adding different paints to enhance your painting. You can add as many flowers as you want. You can add white flowers, you can do purple flowers, maybe they're lupins. When I think of yellow flowers, I think of the molliers. So we have so many of those in my area. We also have a lot of lupins, but I did not want to do that today. No lupins today. And as far as the white flowers, I'm not really sure what these are supposed to be. It just felt right to paint. Another great way to get a really soft and beautiful flowery look in your foreground is when the paint is still wet. If you wanted to go ahead and splatter in some of the color of your choice for the flower you prefer, and they will kind of spread out and look fuzzy and distant, and then you can add more layers of that color over it, and that looks really beautiful. I would have done that this time, but I forgot. Another beautiful way to add some grassy texture, also when your paint is wet, if you wanted to do a little bit of scraping, and that would give a nice highlight of the grass, and then you can add in your darker green. But I also forgot to do that here as well. So I'll definitely have to do that in another video in a future landscape tutorial, because I really do love that look. But they're both great. It's really up to you. And again, gouache here would be wonderful as well. You can even do some more depth in the trees using gouache as well. I don't know what it is about pine trees, but I just find them the most therapeutic thing to paint. They are so relaxing to me. I know in the beginning, when I first started doing pine trees, it was quite challenging and difficult. but over time I developed my own style and I really enjoy them now. Let me know in the comments below, what is the most therapeutic thing that you enjoy painting? What can you paint over and over again and not get sick of it? So for me, that is definitely pine trees. But when I get exhausted of doing landscapes, which I do, I always go for painting botanicals. And I don't do flowers. I'm not good at them. I'm just not one to enjoy painting flowers. Maybe one day. I would like to be able to get some practice in painting wildflowers, but it's just not there yet. So I have no desire for flowers. But what is a subject that you really enjoy painting? So the mountain was a bit flat for my taste, so I went ahead and decided to add a bit more texture using the black this time. And I am just placing in shadows or jaggedy rocks or whatever it is. And there's my cat making a bunch of noise because he's in a paper bag. Do any of you have cats? Anyway, yes, so I am just moving my brush around and just playing with the paint and seeing what looks good and stopping whenever I feel like I've done enough. But really, I could just keep going. And this is the areas where I can get carried away and overwork, because it's just hard to stop sometimes. And I decided I needed even more little splatters. Splattering is the most fun part of painting, in my personal opinion. I just love the splatter. But it gave me a million more little wildflowers. But let me know what you think. I hope you found some value in this video, and be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Take care, everyone.